Hello and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animation not made by the mouse. I'm your host, Octaviano, and this week I'm doing something a little easier. Big thing with the previous episode, so I figured, okay, how about we do this? It's going to be another episode where I just talk about a specific subject, and we'll go from it. We'll go from there. It's probably going to be a shorter episode because of that. I hope you don't mind. Before we get started, I just want to say, if you're listening to this on YouTube, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to the channel, feel free to comment, and ring the bell for notifications. Also, if you're on Spotify or just any other podcast site, follow this show on those platforms. I was thinking about this recently because it came up where someone was asking about basically bad adaptations of comic book characters on the big screen. And one that I saw coming up a lot was Cassandra Cain in the Harley Quinn movie, Birds of Prey. Now, I'm not the biggest Cassandra Cain fan, but even I know that, yes, the version that we got in that is completely wrong. It's a little girl by the movie's end is going to be mentored by Harley Quinn, and it's like, yeah, that's completely different from the character in the comics. I'm not here to explain who the character in the comics is. You can look it up yourself. The general point being is that it is very different from the comics. And yet, throughout the end, every time I saw that, I'm just thinking, okay, but the character in the movie is really good. Like, the character in the movie surfaces the story well. The character in the movie is performed well by the actress. Her name escapes me right now. And I just think that for the movie they made, it worked. I understand that if they make other, stories with this character, like, new movies or shows or anything, that it's not going to be this version of the character, and I'm perfectly fine with that. So acknowledging that this character is different from the one in the comics, is it really fair to call it a bad adaptation of the character just for that reason? Especially considering that, again, I really enjoyed the movie. I think it's an amazing movie. It's really well done. It's really well written. The character is funny. She works well with Margot Robbie. I just really don't see that much of an issue. Like, yeah, I understand it's not the character that fans would want. I mean, if they did this to a character that I really like say, Plastic Man, I probably would be more mad. But at the same time, again, if the story is good, I don't see what the big deal is. I don't know. I just feel like a lot of people get so hung up on adaptations being as accurate as possible. And again, understandable. You want the story that you fell in love with to be properly displayed on the big screen or whatever. But every now and then, it is nice to see a different artist's interpretation of what that character is or who they are. And while some of them stray farther than others, I do feel like, look, as long as the story that they're in ends up being serviced well by that character, it's fine. I mean, we've seen various versions of various Batman characters. What would arguably be considered one of the most definitive versions of Batman based on, how he's been presented since, would be Batman the Animated Series. And if we're completely honest, that show made a lot of changes to characters that we knew and loved before then. And no one seems to mind that all that much. I mean, yeah, personally, not the biggest fan of the whole Bruce Wayne hooking up with Barbara Gordon thing, but we have seen numerous versions of this that have tried hinting at it, at least, since then. I mean, honestly, when the Lego Batman movie did it, I was kind of surprised that I was kind of okay with it there, just because I felt like they did it better than the animated series ever did. I don't know, it just really comes down to execution. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't, and when it doesn't work, it sticks out a lot more. But when it does work, I mean, yeah, you still notice that, yeah, they didn't do the character right, but at the same time, it'd be wrong, at least I feel like, to say that they didn't do the character any justice, because the character came out very entertaining, and it just keeps me thinking, like, we've got so many other franchises that have had numerous adaptations, whether it's the Ninja Turtles, Transformers, again, whether it's DC or Marvel Comics, they have numerous versions, and a lot of times one version will change something from the other, and that's perfectly fine, I think. Sometimes they do stray a lot, further than just like, okay, well, now this character is a different age, or they instead worked closer to the hero or something like that. Like, it varies between what is done, but I think at the end of the day, what a lot of fans ignore by looking for this accurate portrayal is just, well, does it work in the story? Thinking outside of character stuff, when Amazing Spider-Man 2 came out, one of the big things was like, okay, we're doing the death of Gwen Stacy in a film. This was like the first time it was ever done on film. I mean, of course, I think Spider-Man 3 kind of hinted at it with Gwen Stacy when she fell off the building, but it wasn't exactly the same thing. She of course lives, and then the original Spider-Man also kind of referenced it, but swapped out Gwen for MJ, and of course MJ lives. So this was like, like, okay, we're actually doing like the Green Goblin. Granted, this one was Harry Osborn instead of Norman. Dropping Gwen Stacy, she dies. That's the whole thing. And as I'm sitting there watching the movie, I'm just thinking, this doesn't work. I know that this is true to the comics, so it's like one of those things where it's like, yeah, I mean, I understand why you're doing it, but at the same time, I'm watching it thinking, nothing in this story really feels like it needed to lead up to this, other than because fans expected it from it, because that's what happens in the comics. And as a result, I mean, look, no one really cares for Amazing Spider-Man 2. There's some people who have come out and defending it, and I will say that at the very least there are some interesting ideas in there, but that's not one of them. I think, like, if I were to basically be like a script doctor or something like that for that movie, I would have completely changed that. I would have removed it. I just wouldn't have had it. Just because there's no real reason to have Gwen Stacy die in the movie other than just because, well, the comics did it. I to this day, I've never really felt like there was anything in the movie that was actually leading up to that. It just feels like, okay, well, now we got to do this because we have this, and we're trying to pander to people who want that accuracy. So yeah, again, when it comes to like accurate stuff, it's like it just feels like sometimes you focus so much on trying to do something accurate that you forget whether or not it even works for the story you're telling. Not saying that Gwen Stacy should never die again, but if you're gonna have her get killed off, it should be for a reason that matters to your story, because you have to remember that in the comics, the main reason why they even did that was just because they were like, okay, we gotta raise the stakes, we gotta have Peter, essentially reset to an extent where it's like, okay, he's not going to be in a relationship anymore again. He's going to be a loner, and he now has this new tragedy that reminds him why he's Spider-Man. So, it was kind of just on a whim right there, but it was on a whim that worked to an extent on what they were doing, versus here where it's like, well, you're just doing it because they did it without consideration whether or not it works for your story. And I don't think it does. Yeah, whether it's, story beats or, just the way characters are depicted, I think people should really stop and consider what they're telling, what they're doing, or what they're watching before they pass out judgment. And yeah, of course, we're all guilty of it. I'm guilty of it as well, where if a director or a writer or whatever announces, like, okay, this is the version that we're doing for this one, and if it sounds off from a version that I like, I'm like, yeah, that doesn't sound right. But again, it comes down to like, well, is the execution there, and whether or not that ends up working for the version of the story that is being told. Like, if it were up to me, I would never have Ultron be be a creation of Tony Stark. It just, it just sounds boring. I prefer the Ant-Man thing just because it feels more right to Ant-Man. But when the MCU did it, it's like, well, we haven't even introduced Ant-Man yet, We can't just force him in, so let's have Tony be the one to do it. And it actually worked out. I mean, I think a lot of people, still view Age of Ultron as one of the messier films in the franchise, and I understand it definitely is. But I don't think the choice of making Tony the creator of Ultron was one of the problems. Just because, again, one, Ant-Man had been introduced at that point, and two, it just feels like, okay, in the world we're doing, in the version we're doing, we just had in Tony's last solo film, him basically having a meltdown over the events of the first Avengers movie, and he wants to spend more time with his wife. So it kind of made sense, like, okay, let's create this version of Ultron, where it's Tony who creates it because he wants to essentially create this big task force to protect people. Um, Made sense for the movie. Again, not a thing I would do in other versions, but it works for the version that is being told. Guardians of the Galaxy, they had Ego be Peter's father, even though in the comics it's a different character entirely, Jason of Artax or whatever it's called. I'm not too knowledgeable in the Guardians of the Galaxy comics, if I'm completely honest, so I'm not even gonna touch that. But I will say that as a change in the movie, I think Ego works really well. I don't know if if I were given the reins, I'd probably stick with that just because that's the version that I'm more familiar with. But at the same time, the fact that the father was changed, maybe I could do it with someone else, like maybe Howard the Duck is the father. But that's just me joking. Point being is that, yeah, you can see how these characters can change into different things just based on what they are. And, it even continues to this day. Like Quantumania, the third Ant-Man movie, one of the biggest messes of the entire MCU. Very close to being, a movie that I call bad, even though I enjoyed just enough for some of the performances and some of the stuff in it. But it is very close to being one that I would call bad. And I understand why others call it bad, because it really is a mess and it's got a lot of problems. That being said, I'm split on the depiction of MODOK. And this is just to show you that, yeah, even I have my limits. Where MODOK in this version is pretty much the villain from the first Ant-Man movie, which I thought was kind of a clever change, but again, not something that I'd ever do if I were handed the character. And he's essentially just a sidekick to the main villain of the movie, which is Kang, and I'm like, I mean, if we were doing it from the first movie, like as an intro for the character, I would probably do it that way. But I would probably do it similar to how the Batman handled Penguin, where he's like, yeah, he's working for like the big mob boss, but by the end of the movie, he's like rising into power. Like that's what I would do. Like I would have like after Kang is defeated, MODOK decides to take up the mantle of being like the ruler of this place. Or honestly, I would get him out of the quantum realm, not just because the quantum realm actually was one of the most boring looking worlds that they've ever created, but also because I would want MODOK to be interacting with a bunch of other characters. But again, for the version that they did, I think, okay, having it be the villain for the first movie, pretty interesting to tie it back together. Having Corey Stoll, who plays him, do some funny stuff. It's like, okay, well, he's clearly acting his heart out, and he is definitely delivering a fun performance. But yeah, it's a little too different for my take, and for my taste, and it doesn't help that the movie doesn't really sell me on this version of it. So again, it is kind of a weird thing where it's like you kind of do want these things to be accurate, but at the same time, if the story is well told enough, I think you can ignore it and just have fun with it. Me personally, I try to keep an open mind as much as I can whenever it comes to seeing different interpretations. I do, of course, freeze up every now and then, especially when I hear about it or see it in a trailer, and I'm like, that's not a thing that I like. But if I watch the movie, if I watch the show or whatever, and I enjoy what they do with it, then I'm like, okay, this worked. I probably would never want to see it again, but for this version, it's fine, and I'm not gonna ding him for that. And I think that ultimately is what I feel like more people should do. It's just be open-minded about it. Acknowledge that, yes, maybe sometimes some things will be different, but you can enjoy what you're doing with it. I don't know. I just feel like, again, you got way too many of these. You got way too many of these people who just write things off without consideration. Like, well, does it work for the story? Like I saw again when going back to the Cassandra Cain thing, and this is pretty much going to be wrapping it up. Someone came at me saying like, oh well, if you wanted a good version of this, you would have it be accurate. And I'm like, I mean, I guess, but if the story itself is good, what do I care if it's inaccurate? Like, there are so many bad movies out there based on superhero stuff, with portrayals of characters that I didn't really like, even if they were more true to what they've done. Like, I've seen people defend, and to be fair, I do enjoy Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, as goofy as they are, but I do see people saying like, oh well, those are more true to what Batman is in the comics. So that's like one thing that they got over, like the Tim Burton one. And I'm like, yeah, but Michael Keaton's a much better performer in the role, and even though he's more open to killing, which is definitely something that I'm not really fond of, I do think that at the very least, for the version that they were telling, it worked. And it's like, yeah, much as I'll still enjoy Forever and Robin, I can't deny that Batman and Batman Returns just hits the sweet spot a lot better than those do. So again, just because something is a little more accurate in terms of the characterization doesn't always mean that it's going to be better. I don't know. It's weird. I guess like if you were arguing whether or not something is very accurate to the source, like, well, yeah, that's going to be an easy answer. That's a no. But if you're arguing that it's also bad as a result, it's like, well, bad, why? Because it's not accurate. There's a lot of things that aren't accurate that are still good. It would be fair to call Mr. Freeze in the animated series a bad adaptation just because they changed his origin and made it more interesting. I mean, that's kind of the argument that you're going off of. I mean, I guess it's a little different when it comes to adding instead of just flat out changing, but at the same time, it's still a change. I feel so. I don't know. That's just my take on it. Personally, I think just people need to be more open-minded and try out new versions of characters, and see what works about them. I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot of stories out there that are very different from their source, and they're still wonderfully told. And if a version is different but also bad, that doesn't mean that all versions that are different are also bad. Obviously. With all that said, thank you for listening. This has been Octaviano Macias, the host of I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animation not made by the mouse. Again, thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again next time. Thanks for stopping by. Go ahead and follow this channel. Subscribe, like and comment, ring the bell for notifications. Go ahead and also follow my podcast, and give some love to my Patreon account while you're at it. It's www.patreon.com/saicams. Again, thanks for stopping by, and I hope you come back for more in the future.